Okay, I think we're set up here. Hey everyone.
Hopefully we are. Sorry, I'm just still kind of like I keep thinking today's a day that it's not.
Oh, yeah. No, it
With
is. Yeah.
still bugging me. Definitely bugging me.
Okay, looks like we are recording. Hey everyone, I'm the Sagan.
Uh, I am the Tesla. The temptation to say I am the Tesla is still gonna be there for a while.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a moment. We are excited to say, and welcome to Project 6, the first episode of Project 6, which is our tentatively titled podcast project we've started. So, yeah, y'all have been asking for a podcast. And here it is. We're gonna do a podcast, have a short little chat, probably half an hour, about a topic that strikes our fancy. But as far as the IMB Tesla joke, that was a recent thing we discovered that YouTube, if you turn on the closed captioning on any of our videos, apparently it finds us say, or at least specifically on our channel intro video, it finds us saying, "I'm the Sagan and I'm the Tesla" as "I am second and I am B Tesla," which I just found absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, no, it was great. Like during last night's stream, I did mention it's like y'all don't understand how many Easter eggs, both intentional and unintentional, there are on YouTube closed captioning. So it's worth watching them every once in a while. Um, One of my favorite shows right now, obviously, is Hell of a Boss, and I did find out that they intentionally put Easter eggs into their closed captioning,
Yes,
which I think is really really cool.
and the Tesla has shown me some of those Easter eggs, and I have no context on the show myself, but I absolutely find that hilarious. Because obviously somebody's having fun with it, and that's really the way it should be. You know, there are definitely channels out there that use it as an extra way to hide jokes or content for those that happen to have them turned on because well, obviously, people that are hard of hearing or need them for other reasons have them turned on. A lot of times people just turn them on because like they're eating while they're watching and they don't want to, they can't hear over their own crunching. So
Yeah,
guilty. But
yeah, and as long as they're getting the information across, like the dialogue across and everything
yeah.
like that, um, then it's a very effective tool to fill in kind of a dead air or the sounds of two imps, tongue in each other.
Yes,
Um,
that was one of the said Easter eggs. Okay, let's.
uh,
We probably shouldn't go
yeah,
down this particular rabbit hole because I feel like we could actually fill an entire episode with discussing various Easter eggs of that nature. Okay,
oh,
so
definitely.
yeah, episode one. Our topic is top five or possibly top 10 Nickelodeon shows. The Tesla and I were born in 1987, so we were raised right in the prime of Nickelodeon just getting on its feet, and we were there when the first Nicktoons premiered, three of them all on the same day. Ren and Stimpy, Rugrats, and Doug, all at the same time. And we really grew up with the channel and enjoyed a lot of those shows, and so we're gonna discuss some of our favorites and why.
You want to go ahead and start us off, and we'll do five for sure. But we both wrote down 10,
Yeah,
just in case, because we don't know how there is probably going to be some overlap, which is one reason why I was like, okay, maybe 10 would probably be pretty good, because honestly, it's like, yep, that one's on my list as well. And these are non-ranked.
yeah,
These are
these are in no particular order. Like I probably will point out my favorite, but other than that, consider everything else to just be in no particular order. um, I mean, I'll go ahead and start with the first one on my list, which probably is my favorite. Although it's really, this was a really hard choice for me going through the list. Like I moved some stuff around. I took one out of the top 10 and added it to honorable mentions to replace it with another one as I was going through the list. It's like, oh yeah, that show. And because it's not like I've forgotten about them. It's just they haven't come up recently, so wasn't thinking about it when it's like the first thing I think of. But for me, like number one, probably my favorite show, Ren and Stimpy. It's one of the original Nicktoons, and it was always my Saturday night was watching the Snick lineup, and it was like Ren and Stimpy, and Closer Explains It All. Originally Roundhouse, replaced by all that, and then Are You Afraid of the Dark. I've done a whole video kind of discussing the a brief history of Snick, which was done last year, which was the Sagan's top five Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, which that was hard to do. But anyway, Ren and Stimpy. I mean, it's a cartoon cat and dog living together, drawn by a very demented cartoonist, and it felt like so risque as a child, like the stuff they were getting away with on that show. But at the same time, it's hilarious. I mean, my mom and dad both watched it with me, and to this day, we still make references to glazed ham and other things like that from Space Madness, for example. Um, and as an adult, I felt like the show got even better when I found out that the original intention from John Kay was that Ren was supposed to be a Chihuahua that sounded like Peter Lorre, and Snippy was supposed to be a cat that sounded like Larry Fine, which, if those don't know, that's Larry from the Three Stooges. And both John Kay and Billy West nailed those voice profiles for those doing those characters. And this is the only time I'll ever say anything negative about Billy West because I absolutely love Billy West for Ren and Stimpy, Futurama, and everything else he's ever done. I actually feel like John Kay did the better Ren because he nailed the Peter Lorre impression. Whereas I hear too much of Stimpy and Fry and a few other characters in Billy West doing Ren. But for those that don't know, I love that show so much that when I got a Chihuahua of my own many years later, as soon as I learned it was a Chihuahua, because I just had this little puppy in my lap and I didn't know what kind of dog he was. As soon as my dad goes, "Well, he's a Chihuahua," I said, "Well, then he has to be named Ren." Like there was no question in my mind.
Figure out legally obligated to do that.
Yeah, it's like I'm legally obligated to name this dog Ren, and I did, and had that dog for 16 years, and I lost him a few years ago, and I still miss him. So that one has had an impact on my life for sure.
Yeah, no, Ren and Stimpy. I mean, they got away with a lot of it, and I think that's one reason why it might be a theme that we touch on a couple times at least, depending on what other ones we chosen. One of the things that really worked about Ren and Stimpy, in my opinion, was that they had to work around the censors, and I think that
Hmm.
expanded the creativity massively. Because when they were given kind of just carte blanche, free reign to do whatever they wanted,
Yes.
the adult,
Yeah. See,
whatever party,
see,
like,
Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon, which we probably will never
oh,
discuss again outside this podcast. That is John Kay working on his own, basically being told he can do whatever he want. And the show literally was unfunny because it was just all the gross out humor and none of the cleverness to get around the censors.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, like I don't really have much more to add on to it. Like, yeah, Ren and Stimpy really pushed the boundaries, and I think that they were one of the shows that defined what the attitude would be going through the 90s into the early 2000s.
I would agree
Like,
with
just
that.
not just for Nickelodeon, but in general, because the 90s and early 2000s were known as a gross out decade.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, think about for those that know early Nickelodeon. I mean, the slime was everywhere, and yeah, the grosser you could be, the better. It was just, and it wasn't. I mean, it was gross, but it was funny gross. Like it wasn't hurting anybody.
Yeah. Um,
Why don't you go
for
ahead?
me, one of my picks would be something very closely related, which would be Rocco's Modern Life. Um, I
Which,
remember watching that one when it actually debuted, which it started with a little bumper that was done by Ren and Stimpy. And Ren is trying to figure out, what Stimpy's watching. It's like, oh, it's this new show called Rocco's Modern Life, and it was just like so surreal that I'm pretty sure that didn't help me. Like, it didn't help me understand that cartoon characters weren't real because it's like, oh, they're watching the show that I'm watching.
right, yeah.
Um, and yeah, Rocco's Modern Life was there was something about it that I liked a little bit more. I think it was there was a different type of charm to it. It was in the same, a very similar vein, and I think it was at times, maybe even as a whole, a little bit more on the gross out side uh, than Ren and Stimpy. Because when Ren and Stimpy went hard, like they knew how to go hard, like
Right.
strategically hard. Um, but like it just felt like there was always like something green coming out of a character on uh, Rocko's Modern Life, and they too followed the same um, idea of like what can we get away with,
Yeah, and
and like, having a restaurant called the Choky Chicken,
yes,
like,
getting away
well, that
with
makes sense. Makes sense because they would eat the chickens whole, and you'd see them show up in their throats and stuff like that. And of course, being 6, 7, 8 years old, you didn't understand the sexual reference behind it.
and I mean there literally also is an episode where Heifer eats a whole chicken and chokes on it. So it's like, well, that just makes sense. They're eating it and they're choking on it. Choky chicken. Like the whole choke your chicken reference like didn't penetrate because that just wasn't in our minds then. But they got away for that
So I
with
think that
that.
was in my 20s when I found out what that actually stood for, like late 20s. I'd
I
never heard that expression being used that way.
I don't think it took me that long to get it, but it was definitely many years. Like I would have been in my teens for sure before I really got that joke. But it's funny that they got away with that for 2 seasons before somebody at Nickelodeon went, no, you can't do that anymore. So they actually renamed it to the Chunky Chicken for the
You can't do that
subsequent.
on television. No, that was a great show. No,
Yeah, you
literally,
can't
you
do that
cannot
on
do
te-
that on television.
I mean, without You Can't Do That on Television, which for those that aren't familiar, for our younger audience members, that was a show out of Canada that Nickelodeon actually rebroadcast in its very early days. Without that show, we Nickelodeon, as we all know it, or that we're specifically talking about, that I think does have to be dubbed the Orange Years. Uh, it wouldn't exist. I mean, so many things were taken from that show. The slime itself comes out of you can't do that on television.
Yeah, and but yeah, no, like Carlos Alasakari. I always like Rocco was and Stimpy were
Alizraki
my
is
favorite
the
characters. I really liked him as a character.
yeah
Heifer was always up there. Filbert was up there, even though he drove me insane. But that's because I was, also fairly
neurotic as
neurotic
hell. Sorry.
and as an adult. So like I really ended up appreciating it, and like with Ren and Stimpy as well, revisiting it as an adult, you have a little bit better perspective and everything like that. So yeah, like that one is definitely on my top 10.
Yeah, I mean it's in my list too. So I mean that checks one off for me. But I kind of figured we were both gonna pick that one. But I mean, yeah, that to this day, uh, I can just say you turn the page and somebody will respond. You wash your hands. Like it's just a dumb like that gag only happens in one episode, and yet it's that memorable. Uh, but it's and yeah for our younger audience members that maybe aren't familiar with Rocko's Modern Life, like that's where several actors kind of got their start, was one of their bigger roles. I mean, Rocco was voiced by Carlos Alazraqui, who most of you will know as either the Taco Bell dog, for those that remember those commercials, or Officer Garcia on Reno 911. Also, Buondissimo Magnifico on Fairly Odd Parents would be a more recent role that he's done that probably a lot of people
That
would
was
know.
maybe where a lot of people would know
Yeah.
him from. But
Yeah, I was just kind of going down the list of like things that I know him from. But and then Heifer was Tom Kenny's first, well, not probably not his first role, but one of his very early roles. And Tom Kenny, of course, is the current voice. Well, has always been the voice of SpongeBob, which is what he's probably best known for now. But Tom Kenny's got a huge voice acting career from Powerpuff Girls and several other shows that we grew up with. Powerpuff Girls obviously not on this list because that's not Nickelodeon. We'll get into that on a different episode
Yeah,
probably. Um,
and of course, and ending up, Adventure Time, and then just recently
yeah,
Fiona and Cake.
that's
And
that's true.
when
Yeah,
you hear his voice, you know him.
right.
So,
And then
and of course the music video for Tonight by Smashing Pumpkins, which is
yeah,
still one of my favorite videos of all time, but be one of my favorite trivia facts.
yeah. I mean that's a crazy one because yeah, it's like I've seen that video and I'm sure if I went and watched it now, I'd see it. But like I yeah didn't know that until you mentioned it. And
What
then of
about
course.
you? What's number
Well,
two
I
for
was
you?
just gonna wrap up the voice actor thing of saying that Filbert is voiced by uh oh god it's he always goes by uh Mr. Lawrence,
Oh
that's it, who
yeah,
everybody would now know as the voice of Plankton, but it's like that was one of his earlier roles. He worked on Rocko's Modern Life and happened to voice Filbert while he was doing it. Kind of the same situation on SpongeBob, I think too. I think he does some writing for SpongeBob, but I could be wrong on that one. Anyway, let's move on, or we'll go down that usual science day rabbit hole and be talking about this stuff for an hour. So, um, well, next on my list would be Are You Afraid of the Dark? I mean, we're while I'm inclined to lean towards Nicktoons, there were plenty of live action shows on Nickelodeon. They're just as memorable, and for me, at the top of that is Are You Afraid of the Dark? I've done an entire video talking about this on our channel. So if you're interested, please go back and watch that. I won't dive too deep, but uh, yeah, I mean, like I said, my Saturday nights were watching Snick, and it's like that double whammy of Ren and Stimpy right into Are You Afraid of the Dark. That was my like, yeah, this is my Saturday night, and I'm staying up late to watch this stuff. It was, and I just enjoyed it so much. And yeah, I mean, as a younger kid, I genuinely did find certain episodes of the show scary. I mean, I talk about that in my video that the Tale of Midnight Madness was one that used to just. I mean, I'd absolutely still watch it, but it would scare the crap out of me, and I'd be like watching through my fingers, and my dad was, giving me shit for it, of course. Um, but at the same time, I know people that would like just straight up leave the room when the theme song came on. So everybody's got different levels of how scary the show was to them.
definitely. Yeah, the just a quick for me as well on Are You Afraid of the Dark? That one, I was kind of split on that one. That one would have gone in honorable mentions, but literally, if I had done this list tomorrow, that could have been in the top 10. Um, yeah, Are You Afraid of the Dark? The one thing I will say about that on my end is that that show, the original run was really brilliant, and I would
Yeah.
recommend people, if they can, go back and check it out. Because even as a kid, like, it was humorous. There are really funny episodes. They got a lot of really good guest stars. There are episodes that were genuinely scary. There was like some sort of intrigue and mystery usually. And there are episodes that that did not have happy endings. That left me as a kid
Oh yeah.
genuinely depressed.
The first
But not
season.
like in a bad way. It was a really nice way to kind of be exposed to those type of emotions and everything like that. Not everything is going to be a happy ending. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, and they did it in a really nice, you know, a proper way, especially for a younger audience. They knew their audience really well.
Yeah. And the revived run from 96 to 97, the two seasons they did there. It's definitely not as enjoyable, but there are, I would say, like anybody that wants to watch the show, go back and watch the original run of the first 5 seasons. Watch like the first 2 episodes of the revived run, and like I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's one that like there was another one that just had a real like it's not a happy ending, kind of thing. And I was gonna add on to that to say, especially the first season of the original run, there are some dark episodes in that season that like, yeah, this is not a fairy tale. There's no happy ending here. But like, yeah, if you weren't enjoying the revived run, like watch like the first 2 episodes and then just skip to watching The Tale of the Silver Sight, which is essentially the movie, and what I feel like really caps off the original series. But I do have to give a shout out to the miniseries that they did a couple of years ago now. I even said in my video like I had no intention of watching that because I'm like, they don't like let the show be as it is. They don't need to revive it. But I sat down and watched that because it's just a miniseries of 3 episodes, and they did something completely different with the show that still fit in with the original vibe, and I actually genuinely enjoyed it. I have not enjoyed the subsequent seasons they've done for it so far, but that first 3 episode miniseries was actually surprisingly good. All right, we better move on to the next one, unless you have more you want to
Uh,
add.
no, no.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, the yeah. I'm just working my way up my list.
yeah. Oh, I started at the top. I should have started at the bottom. Oh well.
Um, yeah. More. The next one for me would be the Angry Beavers. That one was a little bit mid. I call it like the mid to late era of Nickelodeon for me
Hmm.
because I think it debuted in 1996. Um, and I didn't realize until a long time we operate out of we both of us have lived in the state of Oregon our entire lives. I did not know up until maybe the last 10 years that Angry Beavers was set in Oregon.
That makes sense
It's
given that
pretty,
we're the Beaver State, but I don't think I knew that either.
yeah, yeah. So they operate out of that. And that one was two brother beavers living together and just getting into hijinks. And it was one of those shows where nothing really stands out. But the whole vibe was just fantastic. They worked music in really well. The animation style was kind of unique. It was kind of it was kind of an artsier show. Like if it came out 10, 15 years later, there would have been like a boatload of indie music in it and stuff like that. Because in the mid 90s, for whatever reason, in Nickelodeon, like the indie music that they would
Hmm.
use was jazz. So there's a decent amount of jazz music in there.
Sure, yeah.
Which funny because I didn't like jazz music, and I'm lukewarm on it. I really respect it, just lukewarm on it. But even as a kid, I'm like, this music fits this show. So, and I forgot the voice of Norbert, who
Um,
was Serena's cat Salem, in the live action show and the cartoon. He's got a very distinctive
you're
voice.
right. The voice actor's name is escaping me. I know that
Yeah, there we go.
Dagbert is voiced by
Daggett, yeah.
Daggett. Excuse
Yeah,
me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was reading about Dilbert earlier today, and that's invaded my mind. Um,
is Richard Horowitz,
yeah.
who
Okay. Yeah.
everyone, I mean, right now it is kind of he's been around forever. Like I knew him from um Angry Beavers. I never really watched Invader Zim, but he was Invader Zim. He's got a, and nowadays he's actually the voice of Moxie from Hell of a Boss. So, and I actually got to meet him like a few years back. Actually, he's a cool dude.
He's
Uh,
also the voice of Billy from Billy and Mandy.
Oh yeah, that's right. He's the voice of Billy from Billy and Mandy. That's right. So yeah, there's like three shows for sure that I recognize him from.
Yeah.
But no, I really I always there was something about it, and there's another one that's on my list. Uh, that you'll go okay, that makes sense. I was just talking a little bit, and I'm gonna keep this short. I was just in a stream watching one of my favorite streamers, and we were talking about like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and stuff like that. Just talking about like how like much everyone in this chat liked those shows, and kind of where we kind of stopped liking them, blah 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 blah. And somebody brought up King of the Hill, and I mentioned I was like, growing up, I was like the only kid I knew that liked King of the Hill
Hmm.
because it was that sitcom style comedy. It wasn't like outlandish or bombastic or anything like that. There was something about those type of shows that I've always been would gravitate towards. And Angry Beavers did have a lot of silly moments, but overall, it didn't go it didn't go as hard as Ren and Stimpy or as Rocko's Modern Life. So
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with your sentiment of like there was a set of later Nicktoons, which would be like the Angry Beavers, Hey Arnold, um, Cat Dog, that just uh, that I just didn't enjoy the same way I enjoyed the early Nicktoons, you know. But that said, I definitely enjoyed Angry Beavers. It's not on my list, but it just like you said, I can't think of a particular memorable moment of the show, but I definitely got some laughs out of it, you know.
definitely. Oh, and well, actually, one very last thing about it. I believe the audio had surfaced in the script for the actual final episode,
Hmm.
but Nickelodeon refused to air it.
Really?
So the finale actually never got aired, yeah, because they broke the fourth wall and knew, and in the show, the Angry Beavers knew they were being canceled.
Huh.
So
A couple shows have used that, and it usually works out pretty well. I'm surprised that Nickelodeon would just like refuse that. Unless there was a lot of sort of biting the hand humor involved that Nickelodeon wasn't on board with, which could be understandable.
all right, what about number three for you?
Rugrats. Um, it's I mean it's kind of the juggernaut of the Nicktoons. It blew up and was insanely popular, and actually got a movie made, which was a big thing. In fact, a fun fact, I was rewatching Figure It Out because a friend of ours happened to get a hold of a lot of the episodes. And like, there's one episode where literally every prize they were giving away was a actual animation cell from Rugrats the movie, which also,
Hey,
fun
pretty cool.
fact, I've never actually seen the movie to this day because to me, the point where the show jumps the shark is when they added Dill. Everything before that is just it's just good. It's hard to describe. It's like, and I know some people don't like it because of the animation style, but that was kind of the point, is they wanted it to look like it was a show about babies, what they do when adults aren't around, drawn by babies, almost.
Yeah, and to to put it in perspective, it really genuinely was the juggernaut. Literally up until SpongeBob.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, SpongeBob like took the baton. That's what it boils down to. Like, it
yeah,
was that freaking big. I would say it rivaled us. Well, maybe not, but it's not that far off from the peak of Rugrats and the peak of like SpongeBob's popularity. They're not as far apart because, as you would think, just because, yeah, no, it was seriously that big. It was everywhere
yeah.
for a little while there, especially in the early mid '90s.
Yeah, I mean it's you. There was a time you would anywhere you'd go, you see Rugrats merchandise, and I mean it's popular enough that they've done a sort of a relaunch of the show, but the animation style is entirely different because of course everything's leaning into animating via CG now because it's faster and cheaper to produce. Um, but yeah, I mean
It wasn't
the
bad. I'll say that it kind of worked.
yeah, I
At
mean
least in my
when I saw the trailer for it, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna watch any of this, but at least like it looks like it can work, and they got the original voice actors such as they are, back to do the show. Obviously, a few have passed on now. R.I.P. Christine Cavanaugh. Um, but yeah, it obviously has staying power. It's still around. But to me, the first three seasons, which was weirdly Nickelodeon's policy for so many years, is shows did three seasons and then they were canceled, unless they were like stupidly popular. Um, those first three seasons are great, and I hold the same opinion about SpongeBob. Actually, for anybody that's curious, I think SpongeBob up until they did the movie was genuinely funny, and then after that, after they did the movie, which is basically when Steven Spielberg wanted to leave Nickelodeon, everything went downhill, and now it's just it whatever. It's a money printing machine for Nickelodeon. They're never going to cancel it as long as Tom Kenny's still alive. So yeah, it is what it is.
well, on that note, my number three would be, and I think yours, this is gonna be on your list as well, is all that.
You know what?
Uh,
It's not on my list, but that's only because I put so many other things that
oh yeah,
But it absolutely would be on my list if I were to sit and think about it and rearrange it. I threw one thing on my list that I don't think many people will be expecting me to have on this list.
but well, I'm definitely excited to hear that. Yeah, so all that variety show is where Keenan Thompson got his start.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda Bynes basically, it's where she got her start.
Yep.
Kel Mitchell got his start there. There was a lot. I know there was a couple other real big names that ended up, getting their starts or doing that early on in their careers before getting huge, especially in the mid aughts and whatnot. Yeah, just think SNL but for kids. Like,
That,
and
that
it was genuinely, and it was a very inclusive cast.
oh,
It was kind
absolutely.
of mind, like especially if you grew up in like white suburbs and stuff like that. It had a lot of actors from different races and backgrounds, and I really really respect. I always liked that as a kid. I thought it was cool because it was just like, oh, they grabbed just a boatload of really funny kids. Um, no matter what they look, no matter what they look like and everything like that. And as an adult, it's like, wow, I actually really appreciate that a lot more. But yeah, the original run was really good. I think they went on a brief hiatus and then they came back a little bit later in the late '90s, early 2000s. And they only had like, I think Danny Tamborelli was there, who was in The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Right.
He was a staple at Nickelodeon. Josh Server
Yeah.
and Amanda Bynes. I think those were the only three that made it.
They had
Uh,
Lori. They had still had Lori Beth
oh,
for a little
Lori.
while, but
Yeah,
then eventually
yeah.
she moved on. Um,
So
yeah.
but even the latest stuff was still pretty good. But by that point, my taste had changed, and especially by that point, like that was my big migration and to Cartoon Network. And eventually, I'll go into a little bit more detail. There's a long old video that I haven't worked on in a couple of years now, where I go into a little bit more detail about that. But right around the turn of the century, the early 2000s, I went hard, like almost 100% over to Cartoon Network. So but yeah, all that I would 100% recommend.
Yeah, I was definitely kind of in that same, floating over to Cartoon Network more, but I definitely was coming back to Nickelodeon, but yeah, that second run still had some good stuff, but you said, it's basically SNL for kids. That is 100% how I've described that show all these years. Anytime somebody, it's like, what is that show? It's like, just think SNL for kids. That's 100% like what it set out to be. And I've always loved the fact that, Keenan got his start on all that, and he said his dream was to one day be on SNL, and now he is on SNL, and he's the longest tenured cast member in the show's history. And rumor has it he's kind of being groomed to replace Lorne Michaels at some point, because obviously Lorne can't do it forever. But it's like, really, who's going to run that show, once he retires? And Keenan does seem kind of like a obvious choice, and something that hints towards that is that Nickelodeon had actually revived all that in the last couple of years, and both Keenan and Lori Beth, and I think one other cast member that I'm not thinking of, returned to kind of help the new cast get into the swing of the show. But Keenan was like around behind the scenes, basically running that. So that to me hints towards some truth in the rumor that he may one day replace Lorne Michaels, which is awesome. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's Good Burger is was easily my favorite sketch on that show. Um, and that's kind of where Keenan and Kel got their start. Obviously, they went on to do their own sitcom, and then haven't really worked together in a couple of decades now. But we're getting Good Burger too. Uh,
Oh yeah.
next or probably later this year or next year. I don't remember the exact release date, but it's awesome to see them working together. And I've read that Josh Server and Lori Beth are both going to have parts in it as well. So, uh, is it totally a nostalgia grab at our generation? Yes. Am I going to watch it? Absolutely.
Number four for you.
I'm going to skip what's on this list because I know it's one you want to talk about. So the next one on my list is Legends of the Hidden Temple. Um,
Up. Well, it's gonna be my next one.
oh, really? Okay. Well, there's another one I know you're gonna want to talk about. But yeah, Legends of the Hidden Temple. Nickelodeon was hard into game shows in the mid '90s, and Legends of the Hidden Temple
I would say
was,
that was '80s and '90s
well,
because
yeah, because early Double Dare was definitely early or late '80s.
yeah,
And there is
it phased off or fizzled out towards the latter part of the '90s up
yeah.
until I don't know how long, but I know that they come back in waves.
For sure, yeah. But there was a period where, they were running several game shows all at the same time. But Legend of the Hidden Temple by far my favorite. Uh, the concept is basically, kids are have arrived at the hidden temple that is guarded by a giant stone Olmec head called Olmec, voiced by D. Bradley Baker, who most people would now know as the voice of Klaus the fish on American Dad, but also many, many other voice roles. He's actually Momo in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Uh, but yeah, he voiced this giant stone head that was basically the guardian of the temple, and then the host Kirk Fogg would guide the contestants through three challenges, or well, three rounds to get to the temple, and then one team that won would earn the right to enter the temple to retrieve whatever the MacGuffin of the day was, and because the show only had a budget to give out so many grand prizes per season, a lot of times it was sort of rigged against them. But we didn't know any better when we were kids. We just thought it was awesome, and the kids running through the temple were dumb, and we could do so much better.
Oh God, yeah. The Shrine of the Silver Monkey.
Yeah, I'm
Every kid
sorry.
made
It's
fun
it's
of.
it's three pieces. How do you not put this monkey together? I'm sorry. That still bugs me.
Yeah. For me, um, I always loved history, so it was kind of
Yeah.
up my alley in that regard. Because most of the themes were around historical events. Whether they were fully accurate or not is a different story, but
Yeah.
um,
Put a
but
pin
the
in that.
physical challenges were really cool, and yeah, the temple itself was like I can't overstate how cool this was, especially for the era that it came out in when Discovery Zone was huge and Superplay was huge. Um, because it was just like a cooler thematic version of the giant jungle gyms. And I cannot overstate how just badass that was. And yeah, as a kid, we go to Discovery Zone or Superplay, which I think was more regional. Um, and it was just this giant jungle gem thing, and I would pretend it was the temple from Legend of the Hidden Temple. It was really cool. And Kirk Fogg, I think he always had khaki shorts on, and I think that's one reason why
Yes.
in high school when I stopped wearing just like nothing but basically sweatpants or black jeans, I started wearing khakis, and I think that's one reason. It's because I thought Kirk Fogg was just like the coolest, mofo out there. So, um, yeah, no, that's I can't really add any more to that because it's just good.
Yeah. I mean, it was great. Yeah, I have to second that. Like the steps of knowledge, which was the trivia round, was always kind of my favorite bit of the show. That and the temple run itself, of course, but the temple games, which were basically a set of physical challenges, were always cool too. But I got to tell you, watching it as an adult, because that's another one I've been able to go back and watch a lot of episodes of. Uh, you start to notice how many times they're recycling their own props to fit certain temple games, which is actually
Oh
clever usage of their resources. But yeah, some of the history lessons are either very truncated, like this is how you learn in elementary school. You'll learn what it's really about when you're a little older, kind of thing, or they were just straight making shit up, uh, because they needed something for the day. So like it's some MacGuffin that some historical figure like never actually had or something like that. But there are some definitely in the earlier episodes. There are definitely some that's like, yeah, this is actually pretty accurate. It's just they very much watered it down, for kids, uh, so that they can, because they basically get a 60-second history lesson and then have to answer trivia questions about it. So, all right,
yeah.
uh, yeah, you're up next.
Uh, for me, number five, and I'm curious if this is on your list. The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
That is, uh, that's yeah. It's on. Let's just say it's on my list. Yeah. In fact, I'm editing on the fly and taking one out, and like that one should have been on my list. It was just I happened to stick something else in there as a place as like I'm that might stay on the list. Then I was like, oh, I have 10, and I forgot to go put Adventures of Pete and Pete back. It absolutely should be on my list. So
Uh, Two brothers, both named Pete. Um, Older brother, younger brother, Big Pete, Little Pete. And they're frankly insane world.
yeah,
Again, this kind of touches back on like sitcoms and kind of more mellow humor. Um, it was it had that same vibe where it really was just like a sitcom for two brothers just kind of growing up. It's like the easiest way you can describe it. But there was so much insanity that was going on, and it wasn't a case of, oh, this is all perceived that the adults are crazy. It's like, no, the adults are crazy. The things that these kids are getting into is genuinely crazy. Um, and it was set in northern, was it Maine?
I
It was
think
in
so.
Maine or Vermont or something like that.
I yeah, it's New England for sure. Um, yeah, it's escaping me if they the exact state, but uh, yeah, I mean, I would almost say like Big Pete is kind of the only sane man, in
It
this
could be that
situation.
it's more from his perspective that
Yeah,
because Little Pete's
that's that.
crazier than a shithouse rat.
I've actually almost always taken it as it is a little bit of unreliable narrator on, like it is Big Pete's perspective because he's the narrator of the show.
Yeah, and yeah, they were. It was very well written, like insanely well written. Uh, Very mature writing
Yeah.
style, actually, without having to be like, oh, we have to be adult and edgy. It's like, no, this is just genuinely like that show could have came out mid 2000s
Oh
and
yeah.
fit right in, 100% fit right in. Um, and they would get the at the time some of the most mind blowing guest stars, and I think to this day some of the guest stars are just like first pilot episode they get Michael Stipe of REM
Yeah.
of the band REM. He's just there as not a
And
short scene either. He's like kind of critical to the plot.
right, and Michael Stipe was able to get a couple other people in. I'm spacing on who because it's been a while since I looked it up, but yeah, I know he got a couple other celebrities to come in. Of course,
Yeah, I know that he got the one of the singers from B-52s.
yeah, that he got Kay Pearson to come in. That's exactly what I
Yeah,
was trying to think of. Yeah, because they were, I
and
think that
then
was around the time they were doing Shiny Happy People.
yep, yep. That was like spot on, like in that period. And then like Iggy Pop, Michelle Trachtenberg got her start there.
Yes,
And her dad was Iggy Pop,
I,
which
s-
was just insane.
I still have a minor crush on
Steve
Michelle
Buscemi
Trachtenberg.
was there. Gene Garofalo was there,
That's right. Yeah,
and
Jenny
Billy Crystal
Garofalo.
was perfect. Like I'm not gonna look it up because that's gonna be a rabbit hole. But
Uh,
the show was very atmospheric, and it was hilarious, and it was just an easy watch. Like it was good. It was you wanted to watch it at least once or twice, and then it was perfect background noise too.
yeah,
And then
and
of course, my favorite character was Toby Huss is Artie, the strongest man in
Archie,
the
the
world.
strongest
Right,
man
right.
in the world. Yeah, that the Goodbye
I
My Little
tried.
Viking is genuinely sad.
It was well written. Again, like they weren't pandering, like they weren't really
Yeah,
sugarcoating it. It's like, no, I have to leave, but it's because you're too strong, and it's just like you don't need me anymore to support you because
yeah,
like you are now my my equal. I'm no longer the teacher,
right.
even though you don't
He's
get the
like, I
credit.
need to go off and find another kid that does need my help because you don't need it anymore. And
But
yeah, it's
oh my god,
poignant. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there were so many things that were good about that show, and I mean, right down to the theme song. Like, I'd never heard of Polaris. I still don't know most of their material, but my God, Hey Sandy is like a jam to the point that I charted that so we could have it in Rock Band down at Ground Control, just so we could play that song and think about Pete and Pete.
oh absolutely, it was great, and that's one thing that as kind of to touch on real briefly, at least in my case, looking at like what I have on my list, all of those shows have theme songs that I really like.
Yeah, I would.
Okay, except for one, but it's only because um, the little bit that they don't use a lot of it before the voiceover comes in. But even then, it's like it just hypes you up type of thing. I'm not gonna say which one that is, but I think you'll know when we get to it.
Oh, probably.
But
Uh, okay, let's see. Next, so we already covered Rocko's Modern Life, which would have been next on my list. So the one I took off that I'm like that should have been P and P was Nickelodeon Guts, because while I
okay, yeah,
am
go ahead and because I almost put that on my list.
Okay, I mean, let's go ahead and talk about it anyway. Yeah, I mean, whatever. We're going however long this goes. We may do other short episodes, but I figured this one's going to run on a while because we have stuff to
It's
say about these
Nickelodeon.
shows. Yeah.
It's Nickelodeon, so
Um,
grown.
but yeah, I mean, Nickelodeon Guts was I always looked at it as like almost Olympics for kids, and actually it briefly kind of became that when they did Global Guts.
It absolutely was. It absolutely was.
Yeah,
Um,
and while I'm, not able to do like any of the physical stuff on that show, I just always thought it was really cool to watch these kids compete. It's like that'd be cool if gym class was like that.
yeah,
And
because it was a physical comp. Like they had safety guards and things that helped them. Like they would have bungee.
yeah,
Not bungee jumps, but bungee jumps pretty much that allow the kids to do. But it was there was parts where it was like straight up an athletic competition. Like you can't understate understate that because it totally was. I think you calling it Olympics for kids is like pretty damn spot on.
yeah, I mean the original concept, or that I recall them using watching some of the early episodes a while back, is like extreme sports. Is like this is going to be the sports of the future. Like if you had the ability to, do a competition on the moon, you'd be able to jump a lot higher because of low gravity. So they would put them in a bungee harness so they could literally jump off a high rise set of gym mats essentially, and bounce onto a sand pit to see how far they could jump using assisted with the bungee. And then they just kind of expanded that into more and more different events. And then they started including kids from other countries, and that's where it really became, like I said, Olympics for kids. And I mean, who did not want a piece of the aggro crag?
Oh god, climbing the aggro crag was a pipe dream of mine.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, it's like with a bungee assist, like I could probably do that with enough shit to grab onto, you know.
It was
And
the best part. Like to this day, I still kind of go, maybe I should get into rock climbing. Uh, because of that. I mean, it's not the same, but I mean, there's some overlap. But yeah, the aggro crag was like the coolest thing, and I mean, you would get a piece of it, quote unquote, a piece of the aggro crag, which it was just this giant mountain
right, it was
with
a giant
carpet
glowing
and
trophy.
yeah, the aggro crag itself was a giant, rocky, quote unquote, rocky mountain that you had to climb up, and it would have like eruptions and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and it would change color as you got up higher because it was you against two other kids
Right,
climbing up three different paths, and the first person to the top got it to erupt, and then they got the piece of aggro crag, which was a you know like a glowing quartz crystal, like not real quartz, but it looked like giant quartz
right.
crystals
Yeah, that's
that
what
glowed.
what it's supposed to look like. That they just like hacked a chunk off the aggro crag that's glowing, and you got that as your trophy. And like, I actually saw one go up on eBay for sale a while back, and it's like, who would get rid of that? Like, yes, it's gonna get you some money if you sell it because people like us would drop a lot of money on that. But like, if I had one of those, I would never give that up unless like I was just absolutely destitute. Like, that's a piece of television history right there, if nothing else.
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah, and then in the early season it was the aggro crag, and then they turned it into the mega crag, and then it was the super aggro crag, and each of those iterations they added more obstacles to it, different kind of events. And I know, like in its final configuration, which I liked slightly less than the others because they actually had the mountain divided into three colors to represent the three contestants, and it was only in the final season it was all silver. It was only the tricolor when they would actually shine lights on it to indicate like the paths for the three contestants before they got started. But like what was really cool about it is at the top, like right before the final ledge, they literally had to climb upside down because they'd basically glued a jungle gym to the face of the cliff, and you had to climb upside down and backwards to climb over the top of it to get to the
yeah, there was
the,
a ledge
the final
basically that
peak.
stuck.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean they kept it fresh, but like everything in those days of Nickelodeon, I think it only went 3 4 seasons, but it was always something I enjoyed watching. When I got home from school, and my dad liked watching it with me, and it was always interesting to see what because they had some, some straightforward stuff like, swimming across the pool, that kind of thing. But when they do those ones where it's like you could only do this with the assist of bungee cables, it was some interesting stuff. Uh, you know, uh, like throwing a football into a target that's like 20 feet up in the air or something like that.
Um, so with that being said, because that was the one you just got rid of off your list. Let's go
Right.
ahead and have you
Move on to that.
introduce
So
the other one that's now on the list.
so okay, here's one that probably because I didn't expect to put this on my list either, but I was literally looking at a list of Nickelodeon shows, and I was like, due to its significance to me, I think I need to put this on here. Animorphs, because I forgot that was a
I'm not
Nickelodeon
shocked.
production.
I'm not shocked because I know that you mentioned your love for it in the past,
Yeah,
at least to me. But
I I have almost the entire series. I'm missing a few of the very later books, and I've actually never read the ending of the series, but I know it gets pretty damn dark. Um, but I have like I would say like 4/5 of the entire series, plus like the Andalite Chronicles and the El Hork-Bajir Chronicles, and all the expansion books. I'm just like literally missing like maybe the last five of them, I think. I'd have to actually do an inventory check because part of that was my mother signed me up for the Scholastic. You got the little Scholastic catalogs in school, and you could check which books you wanted and order them. Well, they had a promotion for Animorphs where you joined like the Animorphs fan club, and they would literally send you the new book like every time one came out. And we did that for a year or two, and then at some point my mom canceled it. So that's why I don't have the last bits of the series. And I should try to track those down at some point. But yeah, I got the fourth book in the series as a gift from my grandfather. I'd never heard of it, and he said he'd heard that these were good books, and I read it and I really enjoyed it. Felt like I was missing a little bit of like how they got where they were because I hadn't read the previous books. But then I got that book club and I was able to read it from the beginning. It's like, yeah, this is a really good series. So when it was announced they were going to do a TV show for it, I was stoked. And I remember the night like the pilot episode aired, like I was like I was like, okay, what time is it? I need to go downstairs, get the TV on. I want to see this premiere. And I really enjoyed I thought they cast the characters pretty well. Sean Ashmore, who was later on in X-Men 2 as Iceman, was cast as Jake, the leader of the Animorphs, and like to this day, like anytime I see him, I was like, oh, it's Jake, from Animorphs. Like I just think about that. But yeah, I thought the TV show was pretty well done. I'm sad it didn't last longer, but that's just the way things go sometimes. But yeah, because I enjoyed the book series so much and did enjoy the show as it was, I felt like I kind of had to go on this list.
yeah, Animorphs. I remember. It was not for me. It was one of those like I have this weird relationship with kind of this like sci-fi in general, and for some
Mm,
weird reason that one never really landed for me. But growing up in the '90s when those books were coming out, they were hot ticket items. There's
yeah,
no like again, that's another one of those where it's like, guys, like y'all don't understand. These things
yeah.
were really big,
They
especially for like later, elementary school and early, middle school kids. Like, I mean, yeah, I remember people like in middle school still talking about Animorphs and how much they liked it and everything like that.
Yeah, I mean,
So
and
you can definitely appreciate. I can definitely appreciate like just how popular they were because it's like, yeah, like everybody wanted the latest episode, Animorphs and Goosebumps.
yeah, I
Were
mean,
like the two.
that's literally what I was just gonna say is like at the time Animorphs came out, they were as popular then as Goosebumps were when they premiered. And I mean, those books were flying off the shelf like hotcakes. Everybody wanted them. I mean, I remember the first time I ever saw a Goosebumps book was actually the Scholastic Book Fair at my elementary school because Tesla and I did not attend the same elementary school. But yeah, went into our library and it's like they had this big display of Goosebumps books. And I'm like, oh, what are these? They look really cool. but I couldn't get any at the time. And yeah, a couple years later, or maybe not even a year later, but like at some point I was at a summer daycare because my parents worked during the day, so and they didn't want me home alone. So I went to a summer daycare kind of thing, and our mutual friend Charlie Doherty actually gave me like five Goosebumps books that he was done reading, and he's like, "Yeah, you can just have these," and I fell in love with the series right there, you know. So that's one of those like, if it were a Nickelodeon show, it would also probably be on this list, but it's not. It's actually a Fox Kids show. Um, but the going back to Animorphs, the books were, I mean, everybody remembers those covers because it was one of the kids transforming into whatever the animal, the featured animal of that particular book was usually, and they were using computer technology to morph the picture of the actor they'd taken a picture of into the animal, and then you would see like the stages of the two images morphing together, and it was always really cool to see. And there'd be a cutout in the cover that was usually over the animal's face, so that when you opened the front cover, there was like a full color render of the animal in question. And like, yeah, I mean, like I said, everybody wanted these books. They were the hot ticket item for sure.
Okay, let's see. Next on my list is the one I talked about the intro. Um, Nick Arcade.
Nice. I see that's one that it's not on my list, but it really like I debated on putting that on there really hard.
Um, General premise was another game show. Teams of kids would go head to head playing arcade games against each other, and then controlling a character on like there was this giant gridded area, and then there was an animated character named Mikey, and he would start off somewhere. And your goal was to get him to the exit, but every round you would have him move a spot, and that could reveal challenges, prizes, or like demerits, I guess. Something
Uh,
bad could happen.
yeah, penalties is the word that the show
Penalties,
preferred
thank
to
you.
use.
And of course, like what they would do is like one of the other bigger parts of it was again like arcade games. They actually had arcade cabinets like of real video games up against one of the walls, and then like if you landed on a particular square, you could challenge the other team to like a score attack competition or something like that. And that was actually, I think that was the first place I ever saw the game ActRaiser. Of all games, they got ActRaiser. And I don't think that was an arcade game. It's a Super Nintendo game. It's one of my
Uh,
favorite Super Nintendo games. Um,
a couple of those cabinets were definitely consoles they had essentially put in a cabinet uh,
yeah,
with arcade
yeah.
controls hooked up.
But of course, when you're a kid, it's just like,
Right. Yeah. It's
when I played ActRaiser and finally, played it, I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to play the arcade version. And of course, it was like, oh no, I don't think there is one. But that was one of the coolest parts for me. And then, of course, the part that everybody who watched that show remembers
the video
when
zone.
you go into the zone. I forgot what the
It's
zone's
the
name was.
video zone.
The video zone. Thank you. And it was just a giant. We didn't know this. It was just a giant green screen area
Blue screen
where
actually.
you. Oh, that's right, blue screen. Thank you. Blue screen area where you basically watched monitors like a weather person, and you had to interact like as best as you could in that environment. Um, there's a lot more to it than what I'm saying. I would say check out like any clips on YouTube if you can. And then I think there's some behind the scenes information that's out there about how they pulled it off, and it's actually really unique. But the general concept was you like had to go through 3 levels and then defeat the main boss, and that's how you got the main prize, which was like 80% of the time a trip to space camp.
Right. Yes. Which yeah, how much money did that cost you when you're right there in Florida? But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The video zone is by far the best part of the show, and there is actually a really interesting video showing how it was done when they had the cast of one of the other. They had the cast of Salute Your Shorts. Uh,
That was one of my still probably my favorite episode of that was the
right.
cast of. Salute your shorts.
They did a behind the scenes video with the cast of Salute Their Shorts showing how the video zone worked, and it's out there on YouTube. And yeah, it's literally it's basically almost an obstacle course kind of thing, but everything is covered in blue fabric because blue screen was far more common in the 90s before green screen took over because green screen was easier to chroma out essentially. Too many things would conflict with the blue typically, so they switched over to using green, and that's like the standard today. But blue was kind of the thing back then. And yeah, everything's covered in blue, and they are just looking at these giant TVs essentially to see where they are and interact with these, sprites moving around on screen. Like if they need to touch a, power orb or whatever, or hit a switch, they're literally just like waving their hand around to hit it on screen, and somebody, a guy basically sitting at a computer is running the game and basically changing the switches for them when they consider that they've hit the thing. So I think there was some probably some primitive motion tracking involved too, if I remember right. But obviously at the time it was all very proprietary and hush hush, so they don't go into too many details. But you at least get to see like what what the contestants were seeing inside the video zone, which I thought was really cool.
And before moving on, I will have to make a shout out for Phil Moore,
Yeah, I was gonna
the
say
host
we have
for
to
the
mention
show.
Fillmore. Yeah, Fillmore was such an enthusiastic host for that show. I mean, still to this day, anybody interested in like a retrospective of Nickelodeon during this era we're talking about, absolutely go on Hulu or anywhere else you can find it. Watch a documentary called The Orange Years. They go through and really talk about the history from the very beginning up to essentially what I call the end of Nickelodeon, which is when SpongeBob premieres. That's literally actually kind of the end of the documentary because Nickelodeon as it was is no longer Nickelodeon after SpongeBob premieres. But
Yeah, but
uh
there's a side note. That's not really SpongeBob's fault. It
no,
was just
that's just that's
decisions that which I blamed. I personally blamed SpongeBob for many years for that. But of course, I didn't know that it was like, oh no, this is just the direction that the executives wanted to go and
yeah.
crap like that.
Part of me thinks that if the woman that basically helmed Nickelodeon through its golden years, if she hadn't left to go to ABC uh, in the late '90s, it makes me wonder how if Nickelodeon would have stayed more of what it was, or how it would have evolved. But yeah, it seemed like once she left, then the executives kind of just leaned into, well, SpongeBob is really popular. Let's just throw everything at that. Um, but yeah, Fillmore was such a he'd make up little songs to the tune of the sound or the song they played when the character was walking around the board. In the Orange Years documentary I mentioned, he talks about the years of filming the show, and he's just as enthusiastic there as he would be on the show. Like guy just seems to be full of energy, and it's really cool to see that he is still basically out there being Fillmore.
Oh
uh,
yeah. Um, so what's next on your list?
Clarissa explains it all because and this is why another reason why Pete and Pete should have been on my list is like kind of have to just round out the entire original Snick lineup. It was so good. Um, yeah, I mean, Closer Explains It All was uh, Melissa Joan Hart starring as I think she's about 15 or 16 when the show starts.
I think a little bit younger than that. I think
Maybe
they were like
14.
Sam definitely had not gone through
Puberty. Yeah,
puberty.
okay. Then yeah, maybe 12, 13 when the show starts. I know by the time it ends, she's like 17 or so. Um,
Yeah,
but
they were basically done with high school by the time
yeah,
the show ends because um there was a sequel pilot that ended up airing I think on both Nickelodeon and then another Viacom property, and it was her as a college intern at like a newspaper.
yes, because
It did not do well.
yeah, um, I know the guy that wrote uh the sort of wrote the book that if I remember right, it's loosely based on a book. The guy that wrote that essentially wrote a sequel to Calista Explains It All, which was called Things I Can't Explain. and it follows Clarissa like as she's older and trying to get into journalism because that's ultimately what she wants to do. But yeah, the show follows this girl Clarissa Darling and her uh, sitcom family, but it's very much oriented from her perspective, and she's not into the traditional girly stuff. She wants to she programs video games and she uh, likes current music. In fact, she actually she the character is literally a fan of They Might Be Giants because Melissa Joan Hart herself was a fan of They Might Be Giants.
Yeah,
They
I
wanted
know that.
her.
I know that one of my favorite bands, and that's I think that's it's between that show and Tiny Toon Adventures, where I heard
Where
it
are you?
favorite.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a tough one for me too. I want to say it's probably from Clarissa first, but definitely Tiny Toons not long after because of Constantinople, Istanbul. But yeah, I remember an interview with her saying they wanted her to say she liked New Kids on the Block, and she's like, I don't like them. And they're like, well, who do you like? She's like, I like Them Heavy Giants. I'm like, okay, that's what you like then. Like they rolled with it, and like
Yeah,
they she had input on the costumes and like the her bedroom is decorated really kind of out there for the time, but it's one of those things that just exemplifies the 90s. I think somewhere I've posted on our Discord like this is the most 90s image I've ever seen. It's literally Sam and Clarissa dressed in like that early 90s style of like tie-dye shirts and sideways hats and sunglasses, and because like I did that at one point during the summer at least when I was probably like 6 or 7. It's just that that weird style that was just kind of everywhere. But yeah, it's like all that, like Pete and Pete, like Ren and Stimpy and Art for the Dark. It's just as much a memorable part of my Saturday nights. So it kind of had to go on the list, I think.
no, and I'm right there with like that. Almost went on my list again. That would have been um, probably another one where it's like, yeah, if I had been asked like another day, then
Hmm.
that one would have been on my list. I always liked Clarissa, and it's kind of interesting because um, especially for back in the '90s, it was like one of those shows where even boys liked it, but you didn't
Yeah.
talk about that. You didn't say that you liked Clarissa Explains It All because that's a girl show. But it's like most boys I knew they wouldn't change the channel when it came on.
No, I mean it's yeah. I mean here I am, a guy admitting I loved Clarissa Explains It All. And uh, was a fan of Melissa Joan Hart at least until she kind of got into what she makes these days, and let's leave it at that. But you know, yeah, it was that's actually something they mentioned in the Orange Years documentary too, is that they found it was very much a show that appealed to both boys and girls, and that's kind of what they were ultimately going for. It's like yes, it's a female-led show, but it's not by any means necessarily meant just for girls.
Yeah, and yeah, they did it. They did a fantastic job with it, and yeah, and the other things to bring up would be her family was definitely typical sitcom-y. She had a younger brother who the show like they chose like the best actor possible
Yeah, for
for
Ferguson.
holy crap. He is the most annoying piece of crap ever. And it's all the way through as he gets older too.
Yeah,
Like he
and
pulled it off for all those years.
he absolutely 100% plays the snotty younger brother that like knows he can get away with everything and annoy his sister. Like nailed that
He was
role.
actually smart. Like that was one of the
Right.
really weird things was he was actually like canonically very brilliant.
Hmm. And then
So it's like,
doesn't he become a young Republican later on though?
essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those early '90s that still was a thing. So, but yeah, it's like yeah, I just remember every time Ferguson would be on screen, I would just be hating it. But I have no hate towards the actor because, like I said, I agree with you. I think he nailed the role. Like they cast that part really well.
Yeah, even as a kid where I had, a lot of issues like telling the difference between, reality and, like, oh, this person's acting,
Hmm.
which I still have an issue with. I didn't dislike the actor. Like it was one of those few times where it's like, oh no, like this kid is pulling this off. Like I hate him, but I don't hate him. I hate Ferguson, and he was just the biggest annoying POS out there. Um, so yeah, no, very good choice. Like, and the theme song once again,
Yeah.
iconic. Just yeah,
There's a video out on our channel of me reading the the description of the theme song off of Wikipedia, and somebody who actually charted that, because somebody charted that for Clone Hero. Sorry,
yeah. I
who?
can't remember, but
Uh, and if you were the one that did it and are listening, I sincere apologies. It's just been so long, and we've not been in the Clone Hero thing for a little while. Although that may be making a return. Um, so it's escaping my mind, but because it was an Oktoberfest, so but yeah, somebody basically took this recording of me reading the Wikipedia article for as a description of uh the theme song for Clarissa Explains It All, and then charted that for Clone Hero just so Tesla could play it. And there's a video of it on our channel, and it's awesome. And it's called "The Sagan Explains It All."
oh yeah, no, it was really well done. Um, so um, for my next one would be and we're now definitely in the back half.
Yeah,
Double Dare.
yeah, that's another one I really debated putting on here because again, so many game shows.
That one was just Mark Summers, legend.
Yep.
And it was just obstacle. It was originally like teams of kids doing obstacles and getting absolutely covered in filth and well, not real filth, but like playful filth. Like it wasn't like they
Right,
were rolling
and
around.
slime, oatmeal, pudding, that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, they were getting covered in food, food stuff a lot. And then eventually the best version for me at least was Family Double Dare because then they got whole families doing this.
Right.
They would do physical challenges. It was trivia. Um, and then whichever family won, they got to run the obstacle course, which was one of the coolest things ever to be on Nickelodeon. Was that
Yep.
obstacle course was like top of the line, amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
Which
there
was usually about eight different obstacles.
is yeah, it was always eight
And
different obstacles, but they would change out which ones it would be just to have some variety depending
they
on
had
the
a pretty
show.
wide variety too.
Yeah.
I will say that there were you usually saw one or two like together no matter what of the obstacles, but they would actually cycle them out. They actually had a pretty wide variety, so it wouldn't like the next time you'd watch, it could legitimately be a full new set.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one that showed up quite a bit, and to me is one of the most memorable ones. Is just it was literally a giant nose that you would have to pick in order to find the flag that they'd hidden up in it, and it would be full of this green lumpy goo that they'd put in it. Um, but yeah, each obstacle there was a flag in it somewhere that you had to find, and sometimes it was very obvious, like you just had to like swim across a ball pit essentially and grab the flag at the end or something like that. But then other times it would be
It
this.
was right under his pancake.
Right, like here's a giant stack of pancakes, and we're not joking. Like literally, like think a 6 foot across stack of pancakes. They've buried the flag somewhere in there, and you've got to like pull them apart, and they probably weigh who knows how many pounds. They're covered in fake butter and other syrup and other goo, and yeah, you've got to find this flag.
Yeah, yeah, definitely one of those. The theme song's iconic. It was usually
Yeah,
it was a cold open, but the theme song would
right.
play
Because
right
it,
after
it
the
it
cold.
would it would always start with Mark Summers going on your mark, get set, go, and then it would launch in the theme song, and so like that just got you amped to watch the show right there.
Yeah, and yeah, you can't underestimate how iconic that show ended up being. And it comes back in waves. I know that there's been like 5 or 6 different
Yeah,
versions of it.
I would
Back,
say the best attempt at a revival was Double Dare 2000, which was like after only a couple year gap. They basically just had a new host because at that point Mark Summers had retired from Nickelodeon. Um, I genuinely didn't enjoy it as much because Mark Summers wasn't there, but it was still kind of had the same vibe.
And I would watch it every once in a while, and that was back when I basically didn't watch Nickelodeon almost at all.
Yeah, I mean, and no shade on the host that was hosting at the time. I've forgotten his name.
So those are huge shoes to fill.
Right, yeah, I think he did a admirable job. I just didn't enjoy it because it wasn't Mark Summers.
But but yeah, Double Dare definitely on my list.
Yeah, no, that's a good pick. Like I said, I struggled with that one. You know what? Since we're not sitting on a time limit, and I'm gonna throw one on here on the fly that because I almost put it on here too anyway, which is what would you do?
I almost put it on the list too.
Yeah, which is another
I
show.
almost
It was
yeah.
another show hosted by Mark Summers because Mark Summers was like everywhere in the early Nickelodeon days.
It was the MC of Nickelodeon,
It
like
was
hands down.
essentially, yeah. I mean, and he and
He was the Paul Barker of Nickelodeon,
yeah,
which is
that's a great way to
very
put it. He was the Bob Barker. He was the Bob Barker of Nickelodeon. But what would you do is like I would say like so iconic of the early Nickelodeon days. I mean, it's I would almost call it like 90s the game show because it has no like set purpose. It was all kinds of things. It was like
it was a variety show that happened to also be a game show.
yeah, that's a great way
That's
to
the way
describe
to
it.
describe it. That was one reason why I didn't like put it on the list is because I'm like,
Hmm
how do you describe it?
that's why I didn't put it on my list initially either. I legitimately couldn't think how do I describe the show to somebody that's never seen it. Um, because yeah, it was like they would get an audience of people that were just I'm sure they were all people that had been at Universal Studios and they'd be like, hey, do you want to be on What Would You Do today? You know that kind of thing. But they would do like they would go out and like survey people in Universal Studios, which is because that's where Nickelodeon Studios was based at the time and they would like ask him a survey question and then they would have like the audience vote, they would have a remote with like two buttons on it and they would have the audience vote and it's like what do you think they're going to say and then they would play the rest of the tape and find out like what people said of the two choices or they'd have like sometimes they've had like hidden camera practical joke kind of things. um but the most memorable thing was that they had a chair that I've just blanked on the name of it, but they had a chair that they'd pick a random audience member to go into, and they'd put him in the chair, and then they would hit him with four cream pies, one after the other, that were on these like arms that extended off the chair, and it was like you always like as a kid it's like yeah I want to go on the show and I want to sit in that thing, it's like it was just the 90s. Everybody wanted to get like as messy as possible.
It's kind of funny for me because I vaguely remember the chair. The by far the thing I remember the most is the wall.
I so that was the next thing
Like,
I was gonna mention
it was like
is
an advent calendar.
sorry what?
It was like an advent calendar.
Yeah. They had the what they call the prize wall, and it was 30 different doors in the wall, and they were all different shapes and styles. And basically, they would pick a kid at random out of the audience and like, okay, you get to go up and open one door in the wall, and kid would open the door and like they could get air cannon blast to the face, they could get a pie to the face, or it'd have a prize in it, usually a T-shirt. But sometimes I think at least once like they gave away a trip or something, didn't they?
I think so because I remember tickets being like
Yeah,
tickets and
like
stuff like
they
that.
have a ticket, and then like the ticket would be a chance at another game that they might win a trip or something like that. Um, but yeah, was literally gonna be the next thing I was gonna mention was the wall because that and the pie machine or the pie
Yeah,
coaster as they did later was very much the thing I think of with that show. Yeah, the pie coaster was they set up a short roller coaster track and they put you know either one or I think sometimes two people in the cart because they could fit two people in it. And then they'd run it down the short track, and it would run through this giant cream pie they'd set up that was designed to break away, so they would just basically plow right through it. But they would just be covered in whipped cream and pie crust by the time they were done.
and something to note about that show was, it was very much all ages. Like
Oh yeah, yeah.
at least half the audience, if not more, were adults, and they would get picked. They would
Yeah,
get picked just as often as kids, sometimes
absolutely.
more so.
Yeah.
And then Mark Summers would sometimes do like they would have like these on-set challenges and whatnot. And there's one that I remember because it was a joke. It was a joke that for some weird reason just stuck with me, which was a challenge Mark Summers had for this adult guy. It was like, okay, the challenge is, you to win this, you are you willing to drink unpasteurized milk? And the guy's like, no, I'm not going to drink unpasteurized milk. And Mark Summers went, oh, and he grabs the milk, lifts it above his head, and goes, okay, there, it's pasteurized.
So it's funny you mention that because
And he said, and it was great because Mark was like immediately afterwards, he's like, that is the worst joke I've ever said. And of course, context, being Mark Summers is uh, has basically crippling OCD and is a germaphobe to an extent,
right,
which is what makes Double Dare him hosting Double Dare and What Would You Do even more amazing.
right, because yeah, I mean, you want to talk about like mess the show? It's both of those. Yeah.
But yeah, it was just that show was surprisingly it was a very mellow show for as kind of crazy as
Yeah,
it can be at
it's
times.
it, yeah.
It
If
was
you
still
can,
very
it's one of those. I've tried to see if our friend can get some episodes of it, but since he doesn't want to collect shows that like he can't get everything of it, I would say a lot of what would you do is lost media. But there are episodes out there on YouTube. Like if you're curious, go look it up. It's such a unique show. I can't really think of another show quite like it. Um, but it's funny you mentioned that pasteurized milk thing because I was going to mention another bit that's always stuck with me, and I couldn't tell you why because there's nothing particularly funny about it. But I remember they brought out a cow and they challenged like, could somebody come out and milk this cow?
I
And
remember that one.
and they picked a grown man out of the audience, and he came up and he milked the cow. And then like a moment later, they brought out a glass of milk and said, "Here, have some milk." And he drank the milk, and Mark Summers went, "Would you believe me if I told you that was milk from the same cow you just milked?" And the guy said, "No." And Mark Summers was kind of taken aback, like, "Oh, how do you know?" And the guy goes, "Because it's pasteurized." And I was like, "Ah, like he must be." And it turned out the guy was like a dairy farmer, so he absolutely knew like what unpasteurized milk should taste like. And I thought that was funny that yeah, they basically just swapped it out with like 2% when they went backstage. And yeah, that's just one of those weird moments that's always kind of stuck with me about that show. And it's funny that you mentioned something, if not from that same episode, very similar. But I'm betting it's from that same episode because they were talking about pasteurized milk. So and then yes, the pasteurized thing. That's one of those that joke has come up in a completely different form in South Park, and it took me a moment to get it, and then I was like, oh god, that's dumb.
Oh yeah. So what is your next one that was on the list?
I'll real. Oh, actually, no, 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 no. Let me go back to one. This is probably another one you didn't expect on the list, or maybe you did. I don't know. Space cases.
I am surprised. I'm not not shocked, but I am a little bit surprised if that
It,
makes sense.
it's
It's like,
it's
oh no, I can totally see you liking that show.
it's low. It's lower on the list, but that show only had two seasons, and sadly was canceled during its second season. But I've always enjoyed it. I mean, it had the show was a group of misfits, as they're referred to in the theme song, of Star Academy, which would be like if we started exploring space and we had a academy on the moon, essentially is what it would amount to. But it was an academy that had students from all over our galaxy or all over our galaxy. So it's like they had a girl that was from Mercury and they had a kid that was from Saturn. And the main character was played by Walter Emmanuel Jones, who some might remember as the original Black Ranger. But he's from Earth, and he's the son of a famous starfighter, so he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder. Um, they had a boy from Uranus, and then they had an exchange student from the Andromeda Galaxy, which I always thought was kind of an interesting thing to add in. And so these five kids have all been in detention essentially when this alien ship comes out of nowhere and docks at their space station, and like there's nobody in the building with them other than two teachers because everybody's out on a field trip that they've not been allowed to go on. And so they decide to check out this alien ship. well, they go on the alien ship, and the two teachers follow them in order to like drag them back onto the station. Like, what are you doing? Well, the ship takes off like across the galaxy. I mean, think like Star Trek Voyager before Star Trek Voyager. The ship is thrown through a wormhole essentially across the galaxy, and now it's going to take them years to get home. The other twist being that the ship has bonded with the kids, not with the adults. So the adults can't drive the ship. Only the kids can do it. So they literally have to like teach them how to pilot the ship and figure out how to get back to Earth, which is going to take them years unless they find some other shortcut. And yeah, it just it was always a memorable show for me. It had, like I said, Walter Emmanuel Jones. It had Jewel Staite on it, who had been on Are You Afraid of the Dark a couple of times. Most people will know her now as Kaylee from Firefly, but that was one of her earlier roles. She was only on the first season. Then I don't know. I've never understood why she left. Never found anything out about that. I think they might have like temporarily written her out, and then she was supposed to come back if they'd gotten a third season due to a certain aspect of her character, but that didn't happen. So, but yeah, it's always one I've enjoyed, and I found out later that it was co-created and written by Peter David, who is a well-known Star Trek author. Has written one of my favorite Star Trek novels, Imzadi, which dives into the history of Commander Riker and Indiana Troy. Also, he is friends with J. Michael Straczynski, who created Babylon 5, which is another favorite show of mine. So like it all made sense why I enjoyed the show so much later as an adult, but as a kid, I just enjoyed the show. So
Yeah, and I was when you mentioned it, it's like, oh yeah, I want basically Star Trek for kids.
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Um, yeah, that one did not land for me. Uh,
Totally fair. I mean, it
yeah,
did only
it
last a
was
season and
weird
a
to
half,
think
so
about. Yeah, I mean, it is sad to like know that it only lasted that long because it was like, oh, it's an interesting premise.
hmm
But yeah, for me as a kid, it was like, yeah, time to play some video games.
fair enough.
'Cause it would usually be part of a block where it's like,
Yeah,
this is going into the kind of the sci-fi stuff, but
it it
I don't know, I didn't have the word for it really back then, so it's like,
yeah,
I'm just gonna go, play video games or possibly even go outside.
it was on
Probably.
Snick for during its original season too, so that might have helped it stay more memorable in my mind. But the the
It did have
second the
the
second
intro
season
that it
was
stuck with me though. I will say that
yeah
the intro
that
definitely
I mean
stuck with me.
right now that I've brought up the show, that intro is now running through my head, and if I don't find something to get rid of it, it's going to be in my head all night. That I knew, but that was the risk I took putting it on the list. So yeah, the intro and outro is actually a fairly well done song that basically just summarizes the characters in the show, but it's like one of those earworm melodies that just won't leave your head.
Kind of like when they did the '90s version of Land of the Lost.
Yeah,
Like it's
that was one that would
mostly what
always.
the show's about, but doing it in a really catchy song. So um, yeah, no, like I said, I'm not shocked, but it's like, wow, I'm kind of surprised it even kind of low on the list. It made it on the list, which is really cool. I mean, that is definitely a much more obscure show.
Yeah, well, since we
Uh,
went out to 10 and I rearranged some stuff, it's like, yeah, I feel like I got to throw that one there because it was memorable to me anyway. I know, obviously, not to a lot of other people, but uh, I enjoyed it.
if anybody out there remembers that show and liked it, you are not alone.
Yes, you were not alone. There are dozens of us, literally dozens. um, and it's funny too because Star Trek Voyager is. I know that show is hit or miss for a lot of people, but that was the first Star Trek show that I got to watch from beginning to end. I watched, when it premiered and watched it all the way through all 7 seasons. I had to watch the finale after it aired for various reasons, but I did, finish the entire show. Like, so that's always felt like my Star Trek series. And I only realized just now when talking about Space Cases, like, there's a lot of similarity between those two shows. But Peter David wasn't involved with Voyager whatsoever, so yeah, interesting on that.
My number three, which since I went from bottom top,
Yeah.
top to the bottom, bottom to the top. Hey Arnold,
Yes,
which
yeah, that's
kind of surprised me. And honestly, I will say this: it probably would not have made the list had I not gone back and rewatched it just a handful of years ago.
yeah,
Um, but it's definitely on my list, and like even as a kid, I always kind of liked it because again, kind of a mellow, more sort of realistic show. It was about a kid named Arnold who lived in a boarding house that his grandparents ran. His parents were gone. We, didn't know if he was actually orphaned or what, but his grandparents took care of him because his parents went missing. And it was in the middle of a city, which even as a kid, I kind of recognized. I'm like, oh, this is like Portland. It was based off of Portland, I believe, Seattle, and New York City, and maybe
I
another one.
I always took it as New York due to the fact that their school is a public school, like PS 118. Like we don't typically do that here in Oregon that I know of, where the school is just a
Oh, you're right.
number,
You're right.
and
You're right. That was
that's very much a New York thing.
yeah, but there were other things about it, like the culture was very
Yeah,
much like what, especially in the '90s and for Seattle and Portland, like what those two cities were starting to become, like
sure,
the
yeah,
early versions of what they are now, basically. So there was a lot of like, like I could actually kind of relate to it. So yeah, he grew up in a boarding house with a bunch of tenants that lived with him. They were all relatively crazy at times, but also very human. Um, and he went to school, had best friend Gerald. There was a girl named Helga that had an insane crush on him, literally insane, but at the same time, it was like I'll get into it here in a moment. But and it played a lot of jazz music again, like it was heavy into jazz. And again, I
yeah.
didn't really care for jazz music even now. No shade, no shade from me. I respect the hell out of jazz. But as a kid, I really didn't care for it. But again, it worked in the confines of the show. Like they knew their music was really like well done. Like they knew when to make it stand out, when to pull it back, and then it always fit the vibe. And it would sometimes generate a sense of loneliness and everything like that, which was really weird because it was like, oh, this is in the middle of the city. Um, and yeah, no, it was just a really good slice of life cartoon show that had really unique characters. And it was one of the few shows that I would occasionally go back to Nickelodeon specifically to watch, even as I was huge into Cartoon Network at that time.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, like I said, I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into it as perspective from my adult side, which is what really solidified it for me. Because, like I said, it probably would have been top 20, like almost certainly top 20,
Uh-huh.
uh, a few years ago. But now it's like I can't not put it in the top 10. So, and I know it was one that you mentioned that um, didn't really fully click as well for you.
Yeah,
But again,
I've
I don't think you would like were the type to change the channel, at least not often when it came on.
no, I mean sometimes I would, sometimes I wouldn't. So, like I said, there was that sort of newer batch of Nicktoons of like Angry Beavers and Hey Arnold and Cat Dog, and it's like Cat Dog, I'd almost always change the channel. Sometimes I would watch it. Hey Arnold, it was kind of much like Angry Beavers, it was like what's on Cartoon Network. Nothing. Okay, cool. We'll watch this. Definitely enjoy Hey Arnold a bit more now, as an adult. But I never hated the show. It just didn't click with me the way that the earlier Nicktoons did.
Yeah, which is completely understandable. Like there was a bit of a change between the earlier and the middle Nicktoons,
Yeah,
which I would put those three, Angry Beavers, Cat Dog, and Hey Arnold as part of that middle group.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so the thing is after rewatching it as an adult, they tackled subjects that are dark as hell, and most of it's related to Helga's
Helga's
family
mother and family.
and
Yeah,
her father, yeah, and her sister. Like
yeah,
even as a kid, you could tell that the family was dysfunctional, but you didn't quite, unless you unfortunately lived in a situation like that,
yeah.
you couldn't quite pin it down. Like, okay, why? What is off about this? The mom is always talking about drinking smoothies whenever she's stressed, and she kind of slurs her words, and she's lethargic. And
Hmm.
the dad is definitely super overbearing, short tempered, and Um, and just kind of like a jerk dad. Like he
He's
reminds me of the dad from the Wonder Years to an extent.
he's very neglectful of Helga, but like dotes on Olga.
Both of them, both
Yeah,
of the parents, hardcore
yeah. I mean,
dope.
yeah,
Olga was an overachiever, but they actually even then they go into like the damage being done, even though the parents are praising her and giving her whatever that bending over backwards and spending 10, 20 times as much on hers as they would on Helga. Even with all that, Olga was really stressed out all the time.
oh
Like
yeah,
they
Olga
just
was miserable.
yeah, she was absolutely miserable. She never really even as a kid, you could tell like there were times where it was like, wow, you're just not happy. Like this is really kind of hard to watch. And yeah, like later seasons of Hey Arnold, which I neglected. Like I said, I'd go back occasionally to watch, but so I missed a lot of anything after season 4 and later. Watching through the rest of it and seeing how deep they get into it, and they don't pull punches sometimes, and it's like, oh wow, like her mom isn't like full blown alcoholic. Her dad is like
Is
pretty
neglectful,
abusive.
if
In the
anything.
end, they are can't like there are parts where you're like, yeah, they definitely do care about Helga, but like Olga is like their prize child.
Hmm.
So it's kind of hard to watch, and then to find out the reason why Helga ended up obsessing over Arnold is really heavy. Uh, because it was yeah that God, just to even explain it would be a little bit too long. But let me just put it this way: is a little bit of kindness goes a long way,
Yeah, basically
and Arnold was
he
that
was
type of
kind to her.
character. So, and then the Jungle movie came out in 2017 or so,
Hmm.
and I finally got to see that. And that was actually really well done. So, like, it's really skyrocketed up on my list because they I think they did a really good job. Like, again, they sugarcoated it a little bit, but they didn't dumb
Yeah,
it down too much. That
I
like, this is a dysfunctional family,
yeah,
and Arnold's going through his own thing, and all the characters are going through their own things, and there's character growth too, which was unusual.
yeah, for sure. Harold starts out being another bully, uh, almost like Helga, and then later on he really becomes a friend to Arnold and most of the other kids. Occasionally still has those tendencies, but like, and they delve more into like, like I think that was one of the first cartoons I remember where it's like, oh yeah, this kid is Jewish, and like he's got, like they're dealing with him, I think it's bar mitzvah, don't they at one point?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
he was held back a couple of years.
Right. Okay,
So
that's right.
Arnold
So
was
yeah,
10, Harold was 12, almost 13, and then yeah, they actually did his bar mitzvah.
yeah. I was like, that was cool. That to see another perspective like that. And but yeah, I mean, I still haven't seen the Jungle movie, but I did read the plot of it, and I think it's really cool the way everything plays out in that. I won't spoil that for anybody interested in watching it here. So
Yeah, no, yeah, I would recommend watching it if you haven't.
I did watch the scene, shall we say?
Yeah,
But because I had to, because like yeah, but yeah, I haven't watched the entire movie. I need to do that at some point.
but no, like yeah, Harold definitely high on my list for those reasons. And again, like I said, it wouldn't have been when I was a kid as high. Um, but yeah, rewatching it as an adult, it's like wow, this really puts it in a very different perspective that you appreciate. So, and one last side note, just real brief before we pop over to your second to last. The creator of Hey Arnold was God, I can't remember his name now.
Uh, nope, it's escaping me.
Greg Bartlett. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I was like, as soon as you find it and say it, I'm gonna know that's it. But yeah,
If I recall, up until recently, he was married to Matt Groening's sister.
I believe you are correct on that. I think I remember looking that up a while
Yep, he
back.
married Lisa.
Yeah, yes, he was married to the actual Lisa. For those that don't know, all of the members of the Simpsons family are named after members of uh, Matt Groening's family. Like
Except I don't know if Bart actually
Bart
is.
is
Is he?
not. Bart is not because Bart is essentially Matt, but
Yeah.
he didn't want to name it Matt, so Bart is an anagram of Brat. That's why
Yep.
he's named Bart.
So what's next on your list?
All Real Monsters.
That one doesn't surprise me. That one almost made it on my list, but I kind of kept that off because I wanted to try to get a little bit of a mixture of like live action, cartoon, and
Yeah,
game show. With
I mean,
separate live action game show.
and yeah, there's definitely a couple that could have come off and might have, and others might have gone on for that live action, cartoon mix. Like I said, this was a hard list to compose, and except for some of the earlier ones I mentioned, like I wouldn't, I would not say the rest of my list is like set in stone. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But yeah, with All Around Monsters, definitely one I enjoyed. Concept of that one is think think Monsters University before Monsters University. It followed a monsters going to school to learn how to be scary, but they all lived in a dump in an unnamed city, and it followed three characters that were roommates: Ickis, Crumb, and Oblina. Oblina was voiced by Christine Cavanaugh, who was the original voice for Chucky from Rugrats as well. So kind of Nickelodeon recycling their voice actors a little bit. Um, I know that I believe the guy that voiced Ickis was, yeah, he voiced the red guy on Cow and Chicken. His name is Charles something. I can't remember what his last name is, but anyway,
okay, yeah.
yeah, but so they all go to the school. There's a whole bunch of other background characters that are their classmates, and they every time they go to class, like they have to their homework is they have to go out and leave the dump and go out and scare a human, usually a child, and then they come back to class and they sit in a chair that basically projects their thoughts on a screen so that the class can see their scare, and then their teacher, who's also the principal, called the Grumble, which is this odd character that had like four legs, wearing red high heel pumps and a snout nose, would
Rumble always gave off Frankenfurter vibes to me.
very much as an adult, I can absolutely say yes, he definitely gives off Frankenfurter vibes. Um, and I would be surprised if that was like a partial inspiration for the character. Um, but it's funny because he wasn't voiced by Tim Curry, and they did have Tim Curry doing voice work on that show.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Because yeah, even as a kid,
He's
I knew of Rocky Horror, and I was like, oh yeah, no, like that must be like Tim Curry. But you're right, because
yeah, because
I have it with Greg Berger.
yeah, because if it were to be a Frankenfurter reference, I feel like they almost would have been required to have Tim Curry voicing the character, and I can't I can't picture that in my head, you know. So, um, but yeah, it was a cool show. You know, it wasn't necessarily scary. You know, although there were definitely some neat detailed animations when the monsters would be scaring, because usually they would like distend their mouth, or like one of the characters would like pull out her own guts essentially, and then people would just like and run away, and then then they've done their homework and can go back to class, and all kinds of adventures of like you know like one time they get locked out of the dump and they have to figure out a way to get in because they weren't supposed to be out in the first place, because they have a curfew during the day, so that because they're not supposed to be discovered, they're supposed to go out at night, scare humans, and get back to class basically. So, but yeah, it was just kind of a weird show, but I always enjoyed it.
No, it was a yeah, it was you know not really horror, but very horror adjacent, and kind of had like a gothic at times theme to it. It's very well. It was animated by the same studio that did Rugrats, and you could easily tell that was the case.
Yeah, that was very much
Um,
a classic Suppo uh, production.
but yeah, like I said, that one actually probably would have been on my list as well. Had I, I mean, it's definitely in my top 20. Like I would say it's another one where I probably probably would have swapped it out, for something on this list
Mm.
if you asked me on a certain day. So, um, my number two is Salute Your Shorts because I adore that show to
Yep.
death and that theme
And
song. Holy crap!
the reason that isn't on my list is because I knew it'd be on yours. What I know to be your number one, or at least highly suspect to be your number one, is on my list, which is why I skipped it. But I should have left that off, knowing you would have it and put something else on. But that's fine. Anyways, Salute Your Shorts. Yeah, great show.
Live action comedy series following a group of kids at a summer camp and their just their antics with between the cabins, which was one cabin was for boys and another cabin was for the girls, and just kind of another slice of life. But the writing was always very playful. Again, it didn't really talk down. I mean, it was aimed for a little bit older audience.
Hmm.
Definitely aimed more towards the tween, early teen audience of the 1990s specifically. Um, early 1990s. On top of that, um, it was one of the movies, one of the places where Danny Kuski got his
Cooksey.
Cooksey. Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Where he got kind of his start, and he ended up kind of like everywhere for a while there, doing
Yeah.
a lot of voice acting and everything.
I mean, for those that don't know who Danny Cooksey was, you'll recognize him as the redheaded mullet kid from Terminator 2. If you don't recognize him
Or literally
from,
the kid that saved humanity.
yeah, the kid that
Quite
saved humanity,
literally,
because he literally distracts the T-1000 from finding John Connor.
he lied to a cop and it saved humanity.
Yep.
But by the way, results may vary, so don't take our word on that. But yeah, no, it was just a really really well done show. The characters were all very unique, kind of like a little bit stereotyped and everything like that. But I don't think they were overly so. You had
it
the nerdy kid, you had the two bullies, you had the new kid,
You had the
you had the
rich
preppy
preppy
kid,
girl. Yeah.
you had the preppy girl, you had the sporty girl, you had the nature loving girl,
I
and
w-
they would all bicker and argue, but in the end, it was really good because they would ultimately get along. Like you could tell that they actually liked each other.
yeah, I mean, I would say the first season they definitely leaned into the stereotypes with the kids a little bit. But like by I think later in the first season or definitely by the second season, that's all kind of by the wayside because I mean, by the end of the show, which had only really had two seasons, like Donkey Lips and Sponge are best friends or at least hanging out all the time, and like Donkey Lips and Budnick aren't really hanging out all that much, and they
Yeah,
were like
but
thick as
Budnick was
thieves,
also
but at the start of the show, you know.
yeah. But that said, Budnick was actually more in the group by that point because he was like the
Right, yeah,
full blown bully for a while
right.
there.
Yeah, at the
Uh,
start of the show, he's 100% the camp bully, and like, yeah, he becomes more accepted as the show rolls on.
and then the other thing to bring up is that they changed the technically not really the main character, but the focal point character pretty much.
I would
Uh,
call it the main character. I mean, he was meant to be the audience surrogate, essentially.
yeah, and yeah, they changed the actor from the first season didn't come back for the second season. And I actually liked both of them, but I think I liked the second one a little bit more because he was first off he just looked cooler. He didn't
Uh,
have the mullet. He
he
had like
he
full
definitely has
cut to
the
the cool.
he definitely has the cooler vibe. I didn't really like him in his first episode because I remember at some point I sat down and pretty much watched the whole show front to back, and I didn't like him in his first episode because he comes off as so arrogant, but he does kind of mellow out, after that. So it's hard to say which one I like better. I think they both fit what was needed, which is like the new guy at camp that has to learn the ways of camp.
Yeah, and I think they yeah both of them were really good about that. Both the actors. And yeah, it was just the setting was fantastic. It was summer camp. They were surrounded by woods and trees and everything like that, which was living in Oregon. So are we for the most part. So it was just like I never really deigned to go to summer camp. I went to one camp ever, and that was in on the Oregon coast in the dead of winter. Yay!
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. We went to camp in sixth grade, and it was like cool because it was like, oh, this is kind of like salute your shorts. But in the end, it was like, oh, it's also December 1st. Northern Oregon coast. Ooh, it was very rainy and windy and wet and cold, but not so cold, but just wet cold, which is even worse.
Yeah, I've never gone to a traditional summer camp. I've been to summer camp for Boy Scouts, but that was different because you're basically in a campsite with your troop and you're cooking over a campfire most of your meals, or you have, propane stoves or whatever. You're cooking on your campsite. So it was like you
Oh,
you would camp there, then you would have like certain, uh places to go to try to earn merit badges or interact with other scouts and that kind of thing. But it was not at all what I'd call a traditional summer camp. But I do remember one of the summer camps we went to was very much a location that would have been used for a traditional summer camp, like during the summer, and we were there during the winter, so they were, well, not quite the winter, like the late fall. So it was like they were basically done for the summer, so it was free to be used for something like a Boy Scout summer camp. And I remember it was one of the few times that we're like, yeah, no, you're actually going to go to a mess hall to have your meal instead of cooking at your campsite because the weather's kind of crap to try to do that. And I remember when I was sitting in there, it's like, this feels like Salute Your Shorts here, like sitting in this mess hall with all these other people trying to eat, food I didn't really
yeah.
want to eat.
Yeah, I know it was kind of the same. Like we had a mess hall and the camp that I went to. Side note, which is really depressing. Uh, so Ugg died.
Oh, really?
Yeah, February 2022.
Oh, man, I must have missed that
Ugg
one.
was the camp
Yes,
counselor.
Ugg was the
Kind of
camp
like
counselor.
he was both like the main antagonist, but he really didn't fit that role that well. And the kids actually frequently throughout the show, the series would do really nice things to try to, make him happier
Yeah.
and just help him out because they fought with him, but they really did care about him, which also came through on the show, which is one thing I really liked about it. Yeah, he passed away at the age of 59 just the other
Ah,
last year,
that sucks.
and I didn't know this, but he was the voice of the main villain of Trigun,
Okay,
which
so
was
I remember. I think it might have been from the Orange Years when they were talking about Salute Your Shorts. They kind of mentioned like what some of the other actors have gone on to do, and they did mention like that he was doing voice acting because I remember reading that somewhere that or hearing that he was uh you know voice acting in Trigun, but yeah, Ugg was always kind of, besides Budnick, my favorite character on the show, and
I really liked Doug. Like there was something about him. It was just like he was lovable in his
yeah, I
own way.
mean, and sometimes he'd be, that real hard authority figure, and other times he's just a lovable doofus that just wants to have fun with the kids. And it was funny because of the way Nickelodeon airs shows, where, if you're seeing the episodes when they premiere, you're getting the show in order, but otherwise you're watching it in syndication, and you could get, an episode anywhere in the run, and they would typically be running it for a couple of years after the show ended production. I actually didn't realize for a long time why he was called Ugg, because I think it's only ever mentioned in the first episode, which is that his real name is Kevin Lee, but the kids call him Ugg because then they would go Ugg Lee, and they
Yep, I
and they
remember.
yeah, and they only do that I think in the first episode because other than like Ugg and Budnick, butting heads. All the rest of the kids are pretty cool with them from there on out. So,
But and to tie in the sadness a little bit, you remember who was his like
oh,
his sweetheart?
yeah, no, I was gonna mention that is that yeah, you were talking about the kids always want to do nice things for Ugg. There's a whole episode where they try to fix him up with the. She was the mail lady at the time, I think. She changes
Yeah,
careers like three times over the show, but she was
Mona
like,
Gibbs.
yeah, but his girlfriend Mona Tibbs was played by uh, Christine Cavanaugh, R.I.P., who, as I mentioned, was the voice of Oblina and the original voice for Chucky for Rugrats. She just was kind of, popped in and out of a lot of
If
Nickelodeon
you grew up
shows.
in the '90s, you grew up with her.
Yeah, and she had a very distinctive voice. Um, that wasn't a put on. That's literally what she sounded like. So, uh, yeah, so I always thought it was a neat thing. It's like, oh, she's playing his girlfriend, and yeah, I think she shows up on the show like three different times. but she's working a different job every time. But her last one is like being a uh, something to do with she wasn't a zookeeper, was it? But it was something in that realm, right? Like dealing with animals.
Yeah, I
And
can't
that
remember.
and that's what started their tiff was that he said something like that she took offense from having to do with animals, and so like yeah, then the kids all band together to try to basically patch up their relationship, which of course they do by the end. But yeah, it's that one definitely would have been on my list if I didn't know it was already going to be on yours.
You what's the last one that you have
So
on your list?
well, the problem is I had to skip one because I know it's number one on your list, and I'm going to let you talk about that. So, because like I said, I wasn't doing mine in any particular order. You've sort of gone, bottom to top, which is fine. We had no set plan for
Yeah,
this.
I basically went, okay, what would be the top, my top five? So I just kind of went, okay, here's the top five.
Yeah.
Technically, this is still no order, but
Well, I know the when you're
my top one is
is your
Doug.
top one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute, but I knew that's what it was going to be, and that's the one I skipped over on my list. Um, so so I put a couple of honorable mentions on my list, and I'll dip into that. Um, because these were definitely later shows that I didn't, watch as fanatically, but man, if I caught them, I'd absolutely watch them because they were enjoyable. And I'm having trouble deciding between. You know what? I'm gonna give it to. Boy, this is tough even out of these choices. I'm gonna give it to the Wild Thornberries because they got Tim Curry, and he, when he was on that show, it made it all that more enjoyable. But that was an interesting show. Again, one I didn't watch like religiously, but it focuses on a girl named Eliza Thornberry who travels with her parents, who might as well be a cartoon version of Steve Irwin and his wife. Basically, they run around and film a nature documentary, and Eliza and her older sister Debbie travel with them, and they have a pet monkey with them that's named Darwin. And in the first episode, they happen to be I I am drawing a blank whether they were in Africa or whether it was like deep outback of Australia. But she runs into essentially a witch doctor, and he casts a spell on her that gives her the ability to talk to animals. So suddenly she can talk to her pet monkey Darwin, who then travels around with her all the time. And so most episodes like focus with her going to find animals to talk to in whatever location that her parents have gone to, uh, that week to film. And but she has to hide the fact that she can talk to animals because if she ever tells anybody that she can talk to animals, she'll lose the ability. And so, there's a lot of close calls on that, of course, throughout the show. But her father was voiced by Tim Curry, and it's one of those you can tell Tim Curry was just having a blast with the role and would be really, you know, out there with it, which I always enjoyed. And as a weird bonus, they had a third child that they was a basically a child they found out in the wild who'd been raised by animals that they. Sorry, what?
He's kind of adopted.
Yeah, kind of. I think they essentially do adopt him. They refer to him as Donnie Thornberry several times. So yeah, I think they essentially do adopt him. But the weird thing is that he never speaks a word of English. It's all just gibberish, and he's voiced by Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's just
Which
and
to this day is still like
yeah,
crazy to think about.
it's just every time you hear this like it's like you just think about Flea in a voice booth doing that, and that's hilarious to me. So yeah, not one I intended to include in the main list here, but I wanted to add it as a special mention because one I enjoyed. But like I said, since I had to skip over one, I'll throw that in there now. If I went back and looked at the full list of shows, there might be a different one I'd throw in here.
I have a couple other honorable mentions, we can go over, but we are pushing 2 hours at this point, so let's get on to what I know your number one is.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of figured that. Well, I was expecting that one to be on your list, to be
Yeah,
honest.
it was on my list, but I was like, I know you're gonna want to talk about it, and I absolutely want to let you do that. So,
Oh, I meant Wild Thornberries being on your
oh
list.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
I would that.
you would have expected that?
I would
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
Yeah, it just wasn't when I was making the list. It wasn't one I expected to include, but when I started thinking about what if we have time for special mentions, like what are the ones would I mention, and that was one of the first ones I put down.
No, definitely a good one to put down.
Yeah,
I didn't have much to say because I didn't catch a lot of the show.
sure, yeah,
But yeah, I did like, immediately knew it was Tim Curry. And yeah, he was having a blast with that. And you're right, it was a unique premise, and it was also Klasky Supo,
yeah, yeah.
and they did a crossover with the Rugrats. So
Yes, that's right. That's right. I had forgotten about that, but they absolutely did do a crossover with the Rugrats, which is a cool one.
yeah, my number one, like I said earlier, is Doug. Um, and honestly, I can't tell you why. And that's one that's almost always been, even as a little kid, near my very top, if not my top. But slice of life cartoon following a character named Doug Funny right after his family moves to a city called Bluffington, and just kind of his daily journeys of trying to go through later elementary school. But since I was really young when I first started watching it, it felt like it was like middle school or high school. They kind of treated it like that way, which
Yeah, I
great.
always thought it was middle school, if not high school, and then yeah, there is an episode where like I think basically once, and we're not going to talk very much about it, but the Disney version takes over. Like, aren't they basically in middle school at that point? So it's like they basically were in sixth grade during the.
Yeah, they do graduate in one
Yeah,
near into the series. I don't think it's the last episode, but I think it's pretty close to the end
yeah, yeah. I
where they
think you're
actually
right.
graduate, which was this huge deal too, because they're talking about um first off, Roger becomes human, like really human. He's sharing that he's like scared shitless of graduating
Yeah,
because like I've been here for so long because he was held back, and I'm kind of the top dog here, and I know that I'm not going to be there, as well. So it was like
right.
good
Yeah,
meet the more human side of basically the main antagonist of the series, and him confiding in Doug about it. And then it was always the principal, but you never actually got to see the principal. And in that episode, they tease that you get to finally see the principal.
oh,
Turns out
that's
you
right.
don't.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. What was the principal's name too? He had a really odd name.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it was a odd name, but yeah, you never saw the principal. The main antagonist of the show was the assistant principal, Mr. Bone.
Him and Roger were both co-antagonists.
Well, yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Bone.
yeah. Mr. Bone was the antagonist when or the main adult antagonist. Roger was the bully that was the other antagonist, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. So, memorable music. They had this band called the Beats, which were like a cross of the Ramones and the Beatles, and just add a hard rock band as well. And it was like legit good. Y'all need to check out their music.
Seriously, there are 3 songs out there. Go check them out.
And yeah, it was just his daily adventures of just getting going through life, and it was one of those that there weren't that many laugh out loud moments, but I would watch episodes and probably usually have a smile on my face all the way through because it was just like comfortable. It was cozy. Um, and you know, there were some episodes that were really touching. Like what hit Doug's main squeeze, or he had a girl that he really really liked named Patty Mayonnaise, and there was an episode where you find out a little bit about her past because her dad's in a wheelchair, and they go into kind of how that happened, and it was like kind of like wow, like her mom's not there either.
Hmm.
Because her mom passed away, and yeah, they go kind of heavy on that. And then they go into Doug's background and everything. I obviously I like shows that do that where they go into these characters' backgrounds and kind of like delve deep and go, hey, this is kind of why they are who they are now. Um, But I think overall, like the animation style was fantastic. It was a weird mix where like all the kids had like different skin colors,
Hmm.
which sounds really bad out of context. But
Right.
you
Yeah.
have a character that was blue like Skeeter, and then Connie was green, and BB was purple. Roger was a different shade of green. Patty was very tan.
Very tan. Yeah.
Um, characters that were like straight up pink, and stuff like that. So it was like all the kids, were very varied. Um, and you had your usual, like
I
the
think.
jock and the bully and the nerds, plural.
I think.
Um,
I think like there's only like two straight up white characters, one of which is Doug, and the other is one of the bullies, isn't it? Because like everybody
uh,
else, even his parents are different
his
colors.
parents were pretty like the Funny family were pretty like they were. I think the mom was more pink purple.
The mom was pink for sure.
Dad was
Yeah.
more like peach with a little bit of a tan, and then
Yeah.
Judy was a little bit similar to that.
Yeah.
It was like she was halfway between Doug and Patty.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
And Judy, like, it was, that was his older sister, and she was a beatnik,
Yeah, she's
and
the
Archie was
beatnik to a stereotype.
um, but damn if I didn't have a bit of a crush on her. Because she also oozed cool. Like, she legitimately did. It was like, man,
Well,
she's actually pretty cool.
well, I mean, literally anytime she's on screen, they'd start playing like a beatnik, kind of track, with bongos in it, So it's like
Yeah,
she just had this cool, yeah, man, vibe about her. But
yeah.
she always was trying to act like she was way above it all, way cooler than Doug and anything he was interested in doing. But then, there'd be times
Something would
where,
happen, and her short temper would come out, and she'd,
yeah,
you
exactly.
know, getting down a peg and just really didn't like it. Um, yeah, and I mean, there's actually, a decent amount to say about the show. Like, there's a lot of people I know that actually remember it. Despite like it not being like that was another one where when I was growing up, I was like one of the only kids that actually really liked that show. Um, and yeah, it was just really well done. Kind of, like going back rewatching it, it's still enjoyable. And I think honestly, one of the biggest things is the music and the sound
I
direction.
mean, we have to
It
touch on that because yeah, the creator of the show and Fred Newman, who voiced Skeeter, did like 99% of the music for the show. Like the
and
entire
many of the sound effects.
yeah, like there's all this incidental music that's just like um skip it skip it and that's literally just the voice actor like scatting into a microphone, and they use that as like incidental music throughout the show. Or
Yeah,
I mean, all any of like certain characters have their own theme songs. Like anytime they show up on screen, like Mr. Dink, the neighbor, uh, would always have this theme song when he showed up on screen. Like again, that's all being scattered by this one dude, and I didn't know that until years later. I mean, even the theme song to the show itself is literally him making a bunch of noise into a microphone with like, yeah, do 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 do. We better not do more than that, or we'll get content ID'd. Uh, and that was like a little bit of guitar backing it, and that's it. Like and I think in the actual theme song there is a little bit of drum, but like I've seen him like perform it live, and you don't even need that. Like it's just him and a guitar, and like that's all you need. And it's crazy to think like how many different sound effects and other things he contributed to the show. Even the outro song you would hear over the production title card was just him humming through his nose. Like
yeah,
it,
which is something that he was really good at.
yeah,
And
it's
it sounds like it doesn't sound as impressive, but trust me, this guy would be like a gold medalist if that
oh
was
yeah,
smart.
like this guy was a white Michael Winslow for music, instead of sound effects. Like it
But
yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean,
definitely that was my favorite Nickelodeon show.
yeah, I knew that was gonna. When I put it on my own list, I'm like, oh, that's gonna be on your list. I'm gonna let you talk about it first. I'll just add that I've never been that big into what gets termed slice of life, but something about that show, I've always enjoyed it. It was framed. It was every episode was framed as a journal entry that Doug is writing into his journal at night about what he did during the day. So there's all
Yeah,
kinds of imagined spots all over it because Doug has this really active imagination, so he'll often like imagine what he would, you know, what the
Very
situation would
healthy.
be like if
Yeah.
you were in reality, basically. And there's just some memorable stuff in it. And friends of ours, we make Doug references like to this day. I mean, I, uh, our friend Charlie and I regularly reference "There's a bomb in the lasagna," every once in a while. Or he just sent me a picture of his kid in a new sleeping outfit they got him that's like really cushioned, so it's supposed to be like he's wrapped in a pillow when he's in it. But it looks really big on him, and so he's like, it just makes me think of this. And he sent me a picture, and it was Doug and Skeeter in the giant suits when like the from Think Big, like the parody of the Talking Heads suit that they're wearing, like basically that. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what that looks like. So it's like Doug is still like prevalent in our minds to this day. It's and it is just a genuinely good show up until it stopped being on Nickelodeon.
Which is a story for never.
Yeah, that's a story for never. We do not discuss, and this is probably the only time you'll hear me say it, Disney's Doug.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the top 10 plus a few honorable mentions from us.
Yeah. I got a couple more honorable mentions. I'm not going to delve too in depth to them. One that almost made the list is Mystery Files of Shelby Woo. Uh, Focused on a girl that works as an intern to the local police department. Show starts in Hawaii, but they moved to like New England in like the later season, which I haven't even seen that season. I have it on DVD. I need to watch that season. But it was basically a mystery show. There'd be a theft or a murder or something like that, and there'd be clues sprinkled throughout the episode. And of course, Shelby's gonna solve the mystery by the end of the episode. But it was always fun to play along and see if you could figure out before they revealed who actually did it. So that was one I always enjoyed. Um, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Again, it's one of those. It's later shows, and I didn't catch it as it was airing, but I've seen a fair bit of Avatar: The Last Airbender since, and it's like, good God, is that a quality show? Like they actually, put thought into the story and the animation and everything, and it's definitely one I really need to sit down and watch, back to front. Because I've seen pretty much all of the first book, which would be the first season. I've seen like bits of the second season, and I've seen like some of the third season, but I've never seen like the end of it. Um, don't have much interest in watching Legend of Korra. I just kind of like to see Avatar all the way through. Uh, and shame on you, M. Night Shyamalan, for that abomination of a movie, because it
Oh
absolutely
yes.
did no justice to what is a show that is extremely high quality. Um, and then the other one I was going to throw out is Fairly Odd Parents. Again, one that kind of after our prime time of Nickelodeon, but would always catch it. It's got some infinitely quotable stuff. I still enjoy, if somebody asks like, "Where'd you get that?" Just going, internet. Um, and yeah, it just, it's one of those like I'll watch it when it's on, but it's not like, I'm, binging it back to back to back. I mean, I literally just made a Doug Dimmadome reference the other day because somebody said something and it popped into my head, So it's one of those. It's got some quotable stuff in it. Kind of a lot like Ed, Edd and Eddie, except that's one I definitely binge. But that's a topic for another podcast because that's not a Nickelodeon show.
All right.
Any honorable mentions for you, or shall we wrap this extremely long
No,
first episode up?
I didn't write any honorable mentions down, so um, yeah, I would say we should probably go ahead and call it. So,
All right. Yeah, we'll wrap this up. Well, I hope you've enjoyed us ramble for the last 2 hours and almost 15 minutes. Yeah, this is we thought let's give this podcast thing a try, come up with a topic and see where it goes. We were gonna aim for half an hour, but I could tell after about 15 minutes, yeah, we're gonna go longer because we're gonna enjoy talking about these shows. So I hope that for anybody out there listening to these that aren't familiar with these shows, like we've kind of piqued your interest a little bit, maybe. So, a lot of these shows are out there on the internet, sometimes officially, sometimes not officially. Just gotta go looking. So, but I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of Project 6. Stay tuned for next Sunday when we will release the next episode. And you'll find out what the topic is then, because right now, we don't know. So, thanks all so much for listening. And until next time, you stay classy, Internet.